Hello, Science 20s. Our lesson today is going to be on Newton's first law of motion, and we're going to use that first law in order to explain an object's state of rest or uniform motion. Before we can do this, I need to remind you that a force is defined as a push or pull on an object. We'll measure the forces in newtons, and reminder that force comes with direction because it is a vector quantity. Well, Newton's first law of motion states, in the absence of a net force, an object in motion will tend to maintain its velocity or its speed, and an object at rest will tend to remain at rest. Another way we could say this is, an object in motion will stay in motion, and an object at rest will stay at rest unless an external force is applied to it. So, in both these scenarios, if I take a ball and I set it in one spot, and it's resting, not moving, no velocity, no speed, it will stay there unless we apply a new unbalanced force. That's the same with if I have a ball that's rolling and I take out all the other forces, it will continue to move unless I supply an unbalanced force to either change its direction or possibly to stop the ball. This is the reason behind why satellites in space, where there is no force of gravity, when they're moving, they will stay in motion orbiting around the Earth without us supplying any external forces. Now, we have two forces we have to define in order to do today's lesson. A net force is the sum of all the forces acting on an object, where an applied force is the external force that we ourselves or something applies to the object. This is the force that causes the object to actually move. So, let's look at this example of a balloon. Okay, this balloon has two forces acting on it. One, it's a helium balloon. So we have a force called the normal force that is pulling the helium balloon up with a force of 5 newtons. We then have gravity pushing down on this balloon with a gravitational force of 1 newton. My question to you is, what is the net force? What is the total sum of all the forces? So again, being able to do this, and I'm going to trick my pen into working on this. Grab pen color here. Beautiful. So we're going up. So I'm going to say my normal force is positive. I'm going to say my gravitational force going down is negative. So for us to solve for the net force, we are going to add together the positive 5 newtons, or the normal force of the balloon floating up, and we're going to add to it negative 1 newtons, or the force of gravity going down. And when we add all these forces together, my net force is going to be a positive 4 newtons. Again, the unit is newtons, and again, it's a vector quantity, so you need some sort of direction. Why don't you try this one and then check your answer? So my vehicle is driving forward, so I'm going to make this positive for forward. I have two forces that are resisting this. I've got a resistance force, and this is probably some sort of air resistance, so I'm going to make that negative in the opposite direction. And I also have a force of friction on the ground between the tires and the pavement, so I'm going to make that negative as well. So my F net, or my net force, is going to be, I'm going to add positive 850 newtons of my applied force. I'm going to add to that a negative 25 newtons of my resistance force. And I'm also going to add another negative 75 newtons of my force of friction. And when I've added these together, I'm going to be left with a positive 750 newtons of force, which means my vehicle can easily overcome these other two negative forces, so it's still going to be moving forward in this example. One last one. Why don't you try this one as well? Now, this is a stationary object, person pushing on a wall. Figure out the net force of this, please. For me, I would say, hey, this person is pushing. I would give that the positive value, but it doesn't really matter. The wall is actually pushing back with the same force, so it's negative. Since the object is not moving, right, the wall is not moving, one's pushing positive 150, one's pushing negative 150. I think, yes, you could show your work on this, but I think we can all look at this and go, positive 150 plus a negative 150, there is no newtons of force actually occurring in this example. Now, I have an interesting video for you to watch. I'm sure you've seen this type of video before. Please watch, and then I want to talk about Newton's first law when we're finished the video. Now, if we think about this video, this is a perfect demonstration of Newton's first law. An object at rest will stay at rest unless acted on by an external force. Those dishes, the candelabras, the vases with flowers, they were all stationary. And when he pulled out the tablecloth, he didn't add really that much of a force because, again, think about what he did. That's a highly polished table. That's a very slippery tablecloth. He pulled it fast enough that there was not enough resistance there to cause those objects at rest to actually move. Therefore, when he pulled, object at rest stays at rest. And so it perfectly proves Newton's first law of motion. Well, what does Newton's first law of motion then infer then? Well, there's a natural tendency of objects to keep on doing what they are doing. At rest stays at rest, in motion stays in motion. Well, you've seen this already when you think of Newton's first law and the movement of passengers in vehicles. We've seen the video on the right. However, I want to show both of these. They're both about seatbelts. So we will watch the one on the left and then we'll talk. We'll watch the one on the right and we'll talk again. I like this advertisement because it allows us to see it from a different perspective where the crash test dummies are putting humans into the cars. The human resisted putting on the seatbelt. And you can see that when in motion, an object will stay in motion. And so the human and the car was moving with a certain motion or speed. And when it hit that wall, that motion or speed continues for the human. And so you notice that human continued with that speed, ran into the steering wheel, and hit very, very hard and knocked themselves out. And in most cases, probably would die. I want you to notice when we rewatch this video on the right with an airbag and without an airbag, how that motion, Newton's first law, carries through when we are accelerating, and then what happens when we come to that stop, which is this giant cement wall. You'll notice that motion completely through. Although the car is coming with the motion, that wall stops it. So we are coming to a stop. Well, all that motion is still going with the crash test dummy, and it's going into in this case, the airbag, and that's helping resist it a little bit. The seatbelt helps, the airbag helps, even the headrest helps. And that's this discussion we're going to have next, is looking at the idea of headrests and why they are so important in this scenario. So a passenger will continue to keep moving even though the car has suddenly stopped, and that is due to the idea of inertia. Inertia is the property of an object to resist changes in its state of motion. And this is the key concept that we use in Newton's first law. If you've ever been in a car, maybe with a grandparent or maybe with a child next to you, and you stop suddenly, a lot of people put their arm out to try to help slow down the passenger, especially if you're the one driving. You know it's coming. Therefore, you try to help the person sitting next to you, especially if it's somebody a little bit more vulnerable, like a senior or a child. So if I take a look here, this example is about headrest. In diagram 1, this headrest is adjusted properly for the person sitting in the seat. In diagram 2, this headrest is offering no support for the head. So in diagram 2, the headrest is way too low, which means the head is free to move somewhat independently of the body. So when we get into a car accident, the motion is going to move forward and then back again because our momentum is going forward then back, and the seat is going to support the body and the headrest is going to support the head. Well, if our headrest is not properly adjusted, then when we're slammed forward and when we get slammed back again, our seat is going to support the core of our body, but there is nothing to support our head. So our head is going to slam back and be tilted back farther than it should be for your neck, and you're going to feel it into your neck region. And that's what whiplash happens to be about. So I would think at your guys' age, most of us are very, very good when we jump into somebody else's vehicle to put on the seatbelt. However, just as important is to change the headrest and make sure the headrest is in a spot that's going to support you in case of an accident. Newton's first law states that in the absence of a net force, an object at rest will tend to remain at rest if there is no force acting on the head. Because the head restraint is too low, the head will tend to remain at rest. However, there is a force acting on the rest of the body because the seat is able to push on it. So when the seat is able to push on the body moves with that. Because the head doesn't have anything pushing on it, the head does this snapping motion where the seat is pushing on the body. The head has nothing to do that, so the head is going to snap back, which means we are going to accelerate the neck into a direction it's not meant to go. This is a perfect picture of whiplash where the seat's acting, so the seat's going to push on the lower part of the body. Ideally, we'd love for a headrest to push with this. However, when there's not one, our neck is forced into a position like this where it's not natural, and you are straining and you are forcing muscles and ligaments of the neck to be sprained.